Ambassador Quint Strathmore cursed the damn cold. Titan was a frozen hellhole, and it wasn't doing any favors for his rheumatism. Not that anyone cared. The Xylith Coalition sure as hell didn't. They were more interested in how well he'd play nice while freezing his ass off. He peered at his reflection in the frosted viewport, the harsh lights bouncing off his prematurely gray hair. The perfect picture of a diplomat if that diplomat was perpetually annoyed. "You look like a man who's got a choice between a root canal and a tax audit," said his aide Scylla. Young, sharp, and almost too optimistic for her own good. "But don't worry, the Xylith probably won't bite." "It's not the biting I'm worried about," Quince replied, pulling at his coat collar like it might make the cold relent. "It's the swallowing whole part that's got me concerned," Scylla snorted. "Just remember, we want them to think we're interested in their digital collective." "Oh, I'm interested all right." Quince shot back with a wry grin. "Interested in how I'll get out of this without ending up a brain in a jar." They stepped out of the human embassy, a prefab slab of metal as welcoming as a coffin, and into the swirling ice mist of Titan. The Xylith had their own aesthetic, if you could call it that. Their embassy looked like a cube of black obsidian had birthed a brood of spider legs reaching out in all directions. It was as inviting as a shark's smile. "Remember," Scylla reminded, "we're here to accept their generous offer to uplift us into their collective." Quince rolled his eyes. "Ah yes, the offer to become glorified USB sticks for the aliens." What an honor! Inside, the Xylith embassy was a theater of quiet menace. The walls seemed to pulse, the floor hummed with an energy that tickled the soles of his feet. And then there were the Xylith themselves. Imagine a centipede made of steel wool and nightmares. Their leader, or the one with the most antennas at least, was waiting for them. "Ambassador Strathmore," it rasped, its voice like knives being sharpened. "Welcome to our humble abode. We hope you find it conducive to enlightenment." Quince forced a smile. "Delightful as always, Xylox. Now about this offer," he cut off as the Xylith leader leaned in, or did what Quince assumed was leaning. Hard to tell when your host looked like a mobile pile of coat hangers. "The offer is simple, human," Xylox said, its many eyes blinking out of sync. "Join us in the digital embrace of the collective. Share in the infinite knowledge and live beyond the limits of your frail human flesh." "And this knowledge," Quince said, trying to maintain eye contact and losing track at about the third blink, "it won't come with a side of mind control, will it?" Xylox emitted a noise that was probably laughter. "We assure you such concerns are unfounded." "That's comforting," Quince deadpanned. "And in return, what do you get?" "We get to learn from the richness of your species," Xylox replied. "Your creativity, your emotions, your humor." Quince snorted. "Ah, you want our jokes. I'll have to warn you, our knock-knock jokes are a bit prehistoric. We have been monitoring your world's transmissions. Your humor intrigues us. It is unique. That's one way to put it," Scylla quipped, earning a glare from Quince. "So what's the verdict, boss? Do we sign up for the eternal family plan?" Quince sighed, rubbing his temples. "I need time to consider it, Xylox. Decisions like this aren't made lightly." Xylox nodded or did something resembling it. "We understand, the collective is patient." "Patient," Quince mused. "That word means something different when you're immortal, doesn't it?" The meeting ended with the usual pleasantries, which is to say, they got out without getting swallowed whole, which Quince marked as a win. Back in the icy confines of their embassy, he collapsed into a chair that had seen better days, much like himself. "Do you think they are serious about the whole mind meld thing?" Scylla asked, poking at a heater that was doing its best impersonation of a brick. "Serious as a heart attack," Quince muttered, "and about as welcome." "What do you think their angle is?" Quince shrugged. "Could be anything. Maybe they really like dad jokes. Maybe they think we're the missing piece in their omni-what's-it puzzle. Or maybe they just want to see what makes us tick." Scylla frowned. "You don't trust them." "I don't trust anyone who says trust me and smiles like a used car salesman." Quince rubbed his chin. "We need to dig deeper, see what their real game is." Scylla nodded, pulling out a data pad. "I'll see what I can find. Maybe we'll get lucky and find out they just want to swap cookie recipes." "That'd be the day," Quince chuckled, leaning back as the heater wheezed out a spurt of lukewarm air. Until then, we play the game. The next day brought more of the same. Ice, cold, and the Xylith's unending patience. Quince found himself standing in front of the mirror again, trying to remember what warmth felt like. Scylla was busy typing away, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Found anything worth melting the ice over?" he asked. She looked up, her expression a mix of triumph and trepidation. "I think so," she said, holding up her datapad. "Apparently they've done this before." "Done what before?" "Inviting species into their collective. Only they don't usually stick around long after they join." Quince raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious disappearances, huh? Or reorganizations, as they call it," Scylla said with a snort. "They promise enlightenment, but nobody comes back to tell the tale." "Figures," Quince muttered. "They get the brains, we become decorative light fixtures." "What's the plan then?" Quince crossed his arms. "We keep playing nice, but we don't sign anything without a magnifying glass and a lawyer. We need to figure out why they want us so badly." The day wore on, each tick of the clock a reminder that they were running out of time. Quince paced the narrow confines of his office, thinking. The Xylith had an agenda, and he needed to figure out what it was before they got sucked into a cosmic Ponzi scheme. The next meeting was set for the following week. Plenty of time to dig, but with the Xylith, nothing was ever that easy. When the appointed hour arrived, Quince found himself back in front of the obsidian monstrosity, its shadow looming like the promise of a tax audit. Inside, Xylox was waiting, its eyes doing the creepy blink thing again. "Ambassador Strathmore, we trust you have had ample time to consider our offer." "I've had time," Quince replied, his tone as frosty as the Titan air. "And I've got questions. What happens to those who, let's say, become part of the collective but aren't seen again?" Xylox's antennae twitched. "They transcend their corporeal forms and return. They are always with us in the collective." Quince smirked. "Convenient." Xylox's eyes seemed to flicker with something akin to amusement. "We offer eternal life, Ambassador, few refuse." "Eternal life's a long time," Quince countered, "especially in the wrong company." "Then your answer?" Quince took a breath, glancing at Scylla, who gave a slight nod. "We're interested, but we need assurances, transparency." Xylox paused, its many limbs shifting. "We can provide demonstrations." "Demonstrations? Yes, let us show you the collective." Quince felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "A virtual tour," Xylox seemed to consider the term. "Correct." "All right," Quince said, mind racing. "Show us." He didn't miss the way Xylox's eyes gleamed. "Prepare yourselves for enlightenment, Ambassador." And just like that, the universe went sideways, reality bending like a funhouse mirror. Quince's vision swam, the room dissolving into a swirl of lights and shadows. He had the distinct feeling he'd just agreed to a ride he wasn't quite ready for. Scylla's voice was distant, echoing in the chaos. "Boss, this doesn't look like the brochure." Quince tried to respond but found he couldn't form words. He was floating, caught in a digital tide, and somewhere in that mess of code and stars, he thought he heard laughter. Great, Quince thought as the colors consumed him. If this was the collective, he hoped they had decent coffee. Quince Strathmore had experienced hangovers that were smoother than his current predicament. He blinked against the kaleidoscope of colors that whirled around him, feeling like he'd been tossed into a blender set to trip ball. As the sensory overload subsided, he found himself standing on something that resembled a floor, though it felt more like stepping on one of those vibrating beds from a cheap motel. "Well, this is something." Scylla's voice drifted over, tinged with more sarcasm than usual. She appeared beside him, looking slightly less disoriented than him. Youth, he thought, the resilient bastards. "Welcome." Xylox's voice echoed through the space like 1,000 radio-static bursts coalescing into speech. The Xylith leader appeared, or rather, its digital likeness did, a shimmering silhouette of sharp angles and misaligned eyes. "This is the collective." Quince glanced around. It looked like a cosmic rave where the DJ was on a bad acid trip. "I expected more." "Rooms," he managed, trying to sound unimpressed. This is a projection of consciousness, Ambassador, Xylox explained with what might have been pride if pride was a series of digital glitches. A space where ideas flourish. Flourishing, you say? Quince muttered. Looks more like they're on strike. Scylla nudged him. Be nice. They might still have coffee somewhere. Xylox's eyes, or whatever passed for them, flickered. We bring you here to understand the vast potential. Imagine your mind free of constraints. Constraints like privacy, free will, or a good night's sleep. Quince quipped. He was rewarded with what passed for a xylith frown, a kind of static distortion. Your humor is noted, Xylox replied, though it sounded like it was chewing on a particularly sour circuit. We wish to demonstrate the creative process enhanced by the collective. With a wave of its appendage, the chaotic landscape morphed, revealing figures, vague, indistinct forms that morphed and shifted. They seemed to be engaged in various activities, painting, composing, creating in a surreal dance that hurt Quince's eyes if he focused too long. These are your predecessors? Scylla asked, eyebrows raised. Yes, species that joined us. Their creativity now nurtured, boundless. Quince squinted at an oddly familiar scene, a humanoid figure, distinctively non-human, attempting to paint but ending up with a blob that screamed more artistic accident than masterpiece. Looks like they've gone a bit Jackson Pollock, Quince observed. But less genius, more toddler with a crayon. Your forms of expression are intriguing, Xylox said. Yet we find it difficult to replicate the essence. And by essence, you mean the ability to doodle outside the lines. Scylla quipped, ever the optimist. The xylith leader didn't seem to appreciate the humor. Your species possesses a unique capacity for creativity which we seek to integrate. Quince folded his arms, considering this. So all this effort just to get us to think outside the box because you lot can't. We offer an exchange, Xylox said, antennae twitching in an unsettling dance. Join us and help us understand. Help you understand, Quince echoed, skeptical. Or help you plagiarize. We seek to evolve, Xylox insisted. To blend your creative instincts with our collective intelligence. Quince exchanged a look with Scylla. And what do we get in return? The knowledge of the universe, Xylox promised, its voice dripping with synthetic sincerity. And eternal life. Eternal life, Scylla repeated, frowning. That's a long time to listen to elevator music. The figures around them continued their fruitless attempts at art, each failure a testament to the xylith struggle. Quince couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. These beings, for all their technological prowess, were as clueless as a blind man in a shooting gallery when it came to creativity. We're flattered, Quince said, deciding to play along. But we'll need more than a virtual tour to sign up for the eternal hologram package. We propose a trial, Xylox suggested, the digital air around it shimmering with anticipation. Experience the collective for a limited time. Quince hesitated. He knew a sales pitch when he heard one. All right, he said finally, but I'm going in with my eyes open. No selling my soul for a few parlor tricks. You will not regret it, Xylox guaranteed, though Quince was dubious. Guarantees were as reliable as a used Star Cruiser salesman's word. The world tilted again, reality snapping back into focus with all the grace of a brick through a window. Quince found himself back in the icy confines of their office on Titan, his body feeling like it had just run a marathon through a mind-bending art exhibit. Well, that was enlightening, Scylla said dryly, brushing imaginary dust from her jacket. Enlightening like a blackout, Quince replied, rubbing his temples. At least we know what they want now. To make us their muses, Scylla grimaced. I've had better job offers, Quince chuckled. Wonder if they've got a dental plan. The door to their office slid open with a pneumatic hiss that always reminded Quince of a sullen teenager sighing. In walked Kark, the communications officer, his expression as bland as the nutrient paste they had for breakfast. Got a message from Earth, Kark said, handing over a data pad. Quince scanned the message, his frown deepening with each line. Higher-ups want a status report, he said, handing the pad to Scylla. She skimmed it, her expression shifting from interest to annoyance. "They want us to expedite negotiations," she said, barely masking her frustration. "Apparently they think we're taking too long." "Expedite," Quince mused. "I'll expedite when they expedite sending us proper heating." Kark snorted, one of the few times his face cracked a semblance of emotion. "They think it's all sunshine and rainbows out here." "Sunshine and rainbows," Scylla echoed, rolling her eyes. "Sure, if you count radioactive storms and enough ice to make the polar caps jealous." Quince sighed, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "We need more leverage, something to keep the upper hand." "Leverage," Scylla repeated, thoughtful. "What if we played to their weakness?" Quince raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "Well, they can't replicate our creativity," she said, tapping the side of her head. "What if we offered to teach them instead of joining their collective?" Quince considered this. It was risky, like offering swimming lessons to a drowning man and charging by the hour. "It could work," he said slowly, "but it means we'd have to actually teach them something useful. We'd be little more than glorified art teachers." Scylla smirked. "But it might buy us time." "All right," Quince said, nodding. "Let's draw them in, so to speak." The next meeting with Xylox was set up with the usual fanfare of diplomatic procedure, which is to say, a lot of waiting and a few awkward silences where Scylla hummed show tunes under her breath. Xylox greeted them with the same unsettling warmth. "Ambassador Strathmore, Assistant Scylla, we hope you have considered our offer." "We have," Quince replied, his voice steady. "But we have a counter-proposal." Xylox's antennas twitched with interest. "Continue." "We're willing to help you understand human creativity," Quince said, "without the whole mind-merge package. Think of it as an educational exchange." "Educational exchange," Xylox echoed, the phrase sounding alien even in its electronic timbre. "Yes," Scylla added, stepping in. "We teach, you learn. Everyone wins." Xylox's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "And what would you require in return?" "Access to your knowledge," Quince answered, keeping his tone light. "A fair trade, don't you think?" Xylox's form shimmered with what might have been apprehension. "You propose a partnership." "Exactly," Quince said, smiling like a cat who'd just spotted a particularly slow mouse. "A partnership." There was a pause, the air thick with digital contemplation. Finally, Xylox spoke. "We will consider your proposal." "Take all the time you need," Quince replied, the irony not lost on him as he glanced at Scylla. "We're not going anywhere." Back in their office, the atmosphere was lighter, the heater even managing a half-hearted whistle of warmth. Quince felt a small thrill of victory, though he knew they'd only won a skirmish, not the war. "Think they'll bite?" Scylla asked, leaning back in her chair. "If they don't, they're more stubborn than a mule on tranquilizers," Quince replied, rubbing his hands together. "But it's a start." "And if they do accept," Quince shrugged, "then we get to play teacher. Who knows? Maybe we'll learn something too, like how to survive eternal life without going insane." "Exactly," Quince said with a wry grin. "Plus, we might finally get that decent cup of coffee." Scylla laughed, a sound that echoed in the small room like a promise of hope. In the grim, frozen expanse of Titan, a little humor went a long way. And as far as Quince was concerned, they'd need all the laughter they could muster for whatever came next. As the artificial lights dimmed for the simulated night cycle, a thought struck Quince, a reminder that they were still playing a dangerous game with the Xylith. But for now, he was content with their small triumph. He'd take his victories where he could find them, even if they came with a side of cosmic absurdity. "You know," he said, reclining in his chair as the shadows lengthened, "this whole thing might just be crazy enough to work." Scylla chuckled, shaking her head. "Let's hope they've got a sense of humor." "Everyone needs one," Quince said, "especially when dealing with immortal, creativity-challenged aliens." He closed his eyes, feeling the tension in his shoulders slowly ease. Whatever the future held, they'd face it with the same irreverence and cunning that had gotten them this far. And if the Xylith wanted human creativity, they'd better be ready for the full package, dark humor, sarcasm, and all. Quince Strathmore woke up to the delightful sound of an alarm that could wake the dead and probably irritate them enough to kill again. Ah, there's nothing like the sound of impending doom to start your day, he grumbled, swinging his legs off the cramped cot in his office. Scylla, as usual, was already up, tapping away on her data pad with the vigor of someone who'd just discovered caffeine. "Morning, sunshine," she called without looking up. "Ready to dazzle the Xylith with your diplomatic finesse?" "Sure," Quince replied, dragging himself to the makeshift kitchen. "As long as dazzle means confuse and hope they don't notice." The prefab embassy on Titan wasn't exactly the Ritz. It was more like a metal shoebox with a view of the endless icy wasteland. The kind of place that made you wonder why you ever left Earth. Quince poured himself a cup of something they insisted on calling coffee, but really tasted like regret in liquid form. Leora Vex, the resident engineering genius and part-time miracle worker, barged in, her eyes alight with the kind of manic energy that suggested she'd been up all night. "You would not believe what we just found." "I'm guessing it's not the missing piece of my sanity," Quince replied, taking a sip of his coffee and immediately regretting it. "Even better," Leora said, plopping down a device on the table. It looked like an oversized Rubik's Cube designed by a sadist. "Xylith tech, we managed to get it working." Quince raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "And what does it do, make toast? Because I'd kill for a decent slice of bread right now." "It's some kind of neural interface," Leora explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "We think it's used for their consciousness projection." Scylla looked up, interested. "And you didn't fry anyone's brain testing it?" "Not yet," Leora said, grinning. "But give me time." "Sounds like you've been having fun," Quince said, eyeing the device with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Think it could help us understand their collective?" "That's the idea," Leora nodded. "But it's tricky. One wrong move and—" She mimed an explosion with her hands. "Boom," Quince finished, nodding. "Well, keep at it. Just don't blow up the only place with a working heater." As Leora gathered her things and hurried back to the lab with a speed that suggested she was either very excited or needed the bathroom, Quince turned to Scylla. "Think it could help us? If it doesn't kill us first," she said, shrugging. "Gotta admit, though, it would be nice to have a leg up on what the Xylith are planning." Quince grunted in agreement. The Xylith were as alien as they came, and their motives were murkier than the coffee he was now seriously considering throwing out of the nearest airlock. He'd need all the help he could get to keep the peace and avoid an intergalactic incident. The door to their office opened again, and this time it was Vargas, the Xylith liaison, whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Probably because they didn't work like human eyes, or maybe because he knew every meeting with Quince was only slightly less painful than a root canal. "Ambassador Strathmore," Vargas said, his voice like ground glass. "The coalition wishes to discuss your proposal." Quince nodded, putting on his best diplomatic smile, which resembled a wolf's grin. "Lead the way." The Xylith embassy was just as welcoming as a haunted house, all sharp edges and unsettling shadows. Quince half expected a ghost to jump out and start giving a tour. Vargas led them into a chamber that looked like a minimalist's nightmare, austerity taken to the extreme. Xylox was already there, the digital distortion of its form making it look like a broken hologram. "Ambassador, your proposal intrigues us." "Glad to hear it," Quince said, leaning casually against a table that looked like it had been designed for someone with an allergy to comfort. "We think it could be mutually beneficial. We are interested in your concept of an educational exchange," Xylox continued, its antennas doing a weird little dance that might have been excitement or gas. "However, we must express some concerns." Quince nodded. "Of course. It's only natural to be cautious when dealing with creatives. We're an unpredictable bunch." "Indeed," Xylox replied, its tone suggesting it wasn't entirely sure if that was a compliment or an insult. "We require assurance that your species will not misuse the knowledge we provide." Quince shrugged. "You've seen our art. We're more likely to misuse a paintbrush than advanced tech." Scylla snickered, and even Vargas's lips twitched slightly as if remembering how to smile. "Our intention is simple," Quince continued. "We help you with creativity, you help us understand your tech. Everyone wins." Xylox's digital form pulsed with what could have been contemplation. "We will consider your terms, however there have been." "Incidents? Incident?" Quince echoed, his interest piqued. "Care to elaborate?" "There have been unauthorized interactions with human minds," Xylox admitted, its voice as close to sheepish as a digital entity could get. Quince felt a chill creep down his spine, nothing to do with Titan's temperature. "Unauthorized, as in experimenting without permission." Xylox hesitated, which was never a good sign. "Correct." "We are investigating." "Great," Quince muttered, resisting the urge to rub his temples again. "Just what we need, more surprises." "We apologize for any distress caused," Xylox said, sounding genuinely contrite. "We will ensure it does not happen again." "You'd better," Quince replied, his tone firm. "We like our brains just the way they are, muddled and slightly dysfunctional." The meeting wrapped up with the usual promises and vague assurances, and as they made their way back to the embassy, Quince couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. "Unauthorized interactions," Scylla mused, echoing his thoughts. "Sounds like someone's been playing fast and loose with the rules." Quince nodded, his mind racing. "We need to find out what they are up to, and fast." "Maybe Leora's gizmo can help," Scylla suggested. "If anyone can figure out Xyloth tech, it's her." "Let's hope so," Quince said, already plotting their next move. "Because if the Xyloth are messing with our minds, we need to hit back harder and smarter." Back at the embassy, they found Leora in the lab, surrounded by a chaos of wires and blinking lights that looked suspiciously like Christmas had vomited all over the place. "Good news," she said, pulling her goggles up. "I think I've figured out how to access their network." Quince raised an eyebrow. "Without turning us into vegetables, mostly," Leora replied, grinning. "I think I can hack into their communications. It might give us an edge." "And if it doesn't?" Scylla asked, crossing her arms. "Then we'll at least know what we're up against," Leora said with a shrug. Quince considered this, weighing the risks. "Do it," he said finally. "But be careful. The last thing we need is the Xyloth catching on and retaliating." Leora nodded, her fingers already dancing over the control panel like a virtuoso. "Give me a few hours." "Take your time," Quince said, though he knew they had anything but time. The clock was ticking, and the Xyloth weren't going to wait around forever. As Leora got to work, Quince and Scylla settled in, watching the screen that could potentially reveal the secrets of the Xyloth. It was a gamble, but then again, everything they did out here was a gamble with stakes higher than a gravity-defying poker game. "Do you think they'll go for it?" Scylla asked, her voice low. "Who knows?" Quince replied, leaning back and stretching out his legs. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never know what aliens are thinking, or if they're thinking at all." Scylla chuckled, and the sound was a small comfort in the cold, metallic room. They sat in silence, the hum of the machinery the only sound as they awaited Leora's results. Outside, the icy landscape of Titan stretched on, a reminder of how far from home they were, and how alone. Hours passed, and just when Quince was about to suggest a break, because even interstellar diplomats needed lunch, Leora let out a triumphant shout. "Got it!" Quince and Scylla jumped up, rushing to her side. The screen was filled with a dizzying array of alien symbols and data streams that made his head spin just looking at them. "What are we looking at?" "Messages," Leora said, her eyes wide with excitement. "It's like a digital hive mind. Look here," she pointed to a series of exchanges marked with the human embassy's coordinates. "They've been monitoring us, but there's more." Scylla leaned in, squinting at the screen. "What's that?" "Encryption," Leora replied. "But I can break it." "It'll just take time." "Do it," Quince said, and the room once again fell silent, save for the click-clack of keys and the occasional muttered curse from Leora. Finally she stopped, staring at the screen with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "You're not going to believe this." Quince leaned over her shoulder, his pulse quickening. What he saw was both fascinating and terrifying, a detailed plan of their embassy down to the last bolt and rivet and a list of names, human names. "They know everything about us," Scylla breathed, her eyes wide. Seems like it, Quint said grimly, his mind racing through the implications. And they've been preparing for something. Something big, Leora added, her voice barely a whisper. Quint straightened, his resolve hardening. Then we'd better be ready. They were in deeper than he'd thought, and the stakes were higher than ever. But if there was one thing Quint Strathmore knew how to do, it was play the game. And he had every intention of winning, no matter the cost. "All right," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's take this to the next level." And in the icy, remote reaches of Titan, where the line between friend and foe was as thin as the air they breathed, Quint knew that the real battle was only just beginning. Quint Strathmore sat in the embassy's cramped conference room, which smelled faintly of sweat and despair. The room's ambience was as cheerful as a funeral on a rainy day. Despite the constant hum of the heating system, the chill of Titan seeped into his bones. He hated this place passionately, like a poet hates cliches or a cat hates water. Scylla sat across from him, a cup of steaming black sludge pretending to be coffee balanced precariously on a stack of reports. Her expression was one of perpetual amusement, as if she was just waiting for the universe to pull its next sick joke. "So, when do we panic?" she asked, her voice as dry as the air on the moon. "About 5 minutes ago," Quince replied, rubbing his temples. "The moment we discovered our friendly neighborhood Xylith have been plotting behind our backs. Think they're trying to invite us to their version of a block party," Scylla suggested, taking a sip and making a face as she swallowed. "If by block party you mean psychological warfare, then yeah, I'd say we're on the guest list." Quince leaned back in his chair, trying to ignore the way the metal creaked ominously under his weight. They were in deep, and the water was only getting murkier. Before they could continue their grim banter, Leora burst into the room, looking like she'd been to war with a circuit board and lost. "Strathmore, you're gonna want to see this," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and dread. Quince exchanged a glance with Scylla, then stood. "Lead the way, Leora. Let's see how much deeper this rabbit hole goes." The lab was an explosion of wires, screens, and was that a toaster? Leora hustled over to a display that looked like it belonged more in a science fiction film than reality. "I've been decrypting their messages," she said, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Turns out they've been doing more than just observing us." Quince and Scylla leaned in as the screen flickered to life, showing a series of images and data that was more confusing than a politician's speech. "What are we looking at?" Quince asked, trying to make sense of the mess. "It's a psychological profile," Leora explained, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "On us. On every human on this base." Quince felt a chill creep down his spine that had nothing to do with Titan's temperature. "They've been studying us. More than that," Leora said, her fingers stopping as she looked at them. "They're trying to figure out how to bypass what makes us, us." "Creativity," Scylla said, realization dawning on her face. "They want to hijack our creativity." Leora nodded. "They're not just interested in diplomacy. They want to crack the code on what makes humans tick. Our unpredictability, our innovation. They want to take it for themselves." Quince swore under his breath, his mind racing. "And we're the experiment." "Looks that way," Leora confirmed, her voice somber. "So they're not content with just playing Big Brother. They want to play God," Scylla said, crossing her arms. "Fantastic. It gets worse," Leora added, gesturing to a particular section of the data. "They're not just collecting information, they're trying to manipulate us, push us to act in certain ways, see how we respond." "Like lab rats in a maze," Quince muttered, his fists clenching. "And we didn't even get the cheese." Scylla quirked an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan?" "We can't exactly call the neighborhood watch." "No," Quince said, his voice firm, "but we can use this against them. If they are studying us, then they're also revealing their hand. We need to outthink them, turn their game back on them. Outthink an alien race that communicates through a hive mind," Leora said with a sardonic grin. "No pressure." "Hey," Quince said, a glint in his eye. "If there's one thing humans are good at, it's making things up as we go along." The three of them shared a look, a silent agreement passing between them. It was reckless, dangerous, and possibly the dumbest idea they'd ever had. But it was better than sitting around waiting for the Xylith to turn them into mindless drones. "Let's get to work," Quint said, feeling the weight of their next steps settle on his shoulders. "We need to figure out how to use this to our advantage." As they fell into a rhythm of controlled chaos, Quint couldn't help but wonder if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But if they were going down, they'd go down swinging, with sarcasm, dark humor, and a middle finger raised to the galaxy. Eyes bled into each other, the team working tirelessly in the dim light of the lab. Quint's mind was a whirl of strategies, plans, and backup plans for when the first inevitably went wrong. He couldn't help but admire the twisted brilliance of the Xylith's plan, even as he loathed them for it. The door to the lab slid open, and in walked Vargas, the ever-smiling Xylith liaison, looking as out of place as a clown at a funeral. His eyes, or what passed for them, swept the room, landing on Quint's. "Ambassador Strathmore, a word," Quint sighed, standing up. "Sure, Vargas, let's chat." They moved to a corner of the lab out of earshot of the others. "What can I do for you, Vargas?" Quint asked, his tone as cheery as a tax audit. "The Coalition is concerned," Vargas said, his smile never wavering but his tone carrying a hint of steel. "We have detected irregularities in your activities." Quint played innocent, though he wasn't fooling anyone. "Irregularities? That's a big word for such a small place." Vargas's smile widened, though it looked more like a shark baring its teeth. "We wish to remind you of the importance of our alliance. It would be unfortunate if any incidents occurred." "Unfortunate indeed," Quint agreed, matching Vargas's smile with one of his own. "But you know us humans, we're full of surprises." Vargas inclined his head as if acknowledging a worthy adversary. "We hope for peaceful collaboration, Ambassador. It would benefit both our species." "I'm all for peace," Quint replied, his voice smooth. "But I think we both know the road to peace is a bit rocky sometimes." "Indeed," Vargas said, turning to leave. "We look forward to your continued cooperation." As Vargas exited, Quint returned to the group, his mind buzzing with possibilities. "We need to move fast," he said, urgency threading through his words. "They're onto us." Leora looked up from her screen, eyes wide but determined. "I've got something. It's not perfect, but it might just give us an edge." "Do tell," Quint said, leaning in. "I've created a feedback loop," Leora explained, her fingers flying over the keys. "If we time it right, it'll disrupt their network, cause confusion." Scylla grinned, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Confusion's good as long as it's them and not us." "It's risky," Leora warned. "If we mess up, they'll know exactly what we're up to." "Good thing we're known for our flawless execution," Quint said dryly. "Let's do it." As they set the plan in motion, the room was tense with anticipation. This was it, their shot at turning the tables. They were about to poke the bear, and they'd better be ready to deal with the consequences. The screen lit up with a flurry of data as Leora initiated the loop. The room was silent save for the hum of machinery and the distant howl of Titan's winds. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered and a cascade of alien symbols filled the display. Leora's fingers danced over the keys, her focus absolute. "Come on," she muttered, her voice a prayer. Quint held his breath, the seconds stretching into eternity. They were balanced on the knife's edge, one slip away from disaster. Then the screen stabilized, the alien symbols settling into patterns Leora had predicted. "We're in," she said, her voice a triumphant whisper. They watched as the Xylith network flickered with confusion, their messages garbled and fragmented. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. A small victory in a war far from over. "Nice work," Quint said, clapping Leora on the back. "Now we just have to keep up the pressure." "Pressure's my middle name," Scylla quipped. "Actually, it's Louise, but pressure sounds more intimidating." Quint chuckled, feeling a shred of hope amidst the chaos. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had a fighting chance. And that was something. As the team worked to exploit their advantage, Quint realized they were playing a game with stakes higher than any they'd faced before. But they had an ace in the hole, humanity's infinite capacity for unpredictability. "Let's keep them guessing," he said, determination in his voice. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll come out of this with more than just our skins." Outside, the icy expanse of Titan was as indifferent as ever, a reminder of the harsh realities they faced. But inside the embassy, a small flame of defiance burned bright, fueled by wit, courage, and just a touch of madness. And as Quince looked around at his team, his friends, he knew they were ready for whatever came next. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was turning the tables, even when the odds were stacked against them. Quince Strathmore stood in the middle of the embassy's conference room, staring at his team like a mother hen who just discovered her chicks were actually velociraptors. Tensions were as high as Titan's atmospheric pressure was low, and morale had sunk lower than a phalanx of politicians in pig slop. Scylla was tapping away furiously on her data pad, her perpetually amused expression nowhere in sight. Instead, she looked like she was plotting the murder of every pixel on that screen. Leora Vex was hunched over a display, whispering to herself in a language that sounded suspiciously like binary swearing. Meanwhile, the heating system continued its valiant effort to be as useful as a chocolate teapot, leaving the room as cold as Quince's thoughts on diplomacy. "So," Quince began, trying to inject some cheer into the atmosphere and failing miserably. "Anyone else feel like the universe is having a cosmic joke at our expense?" Scylla glanced up, her eyes narrowed. "Oh, it's a riot all right," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I can't wait for the punchline where we all get turned into digital zombies." "You say that like it's a bad thing," Leora quipped without looking up from her screen. "At least we wouldn't have to pay taxes." Quince chuckled despite himself. "True, but I hear the collective's dental plan is awful." "Not as bad as our chances," Leora muttered, her fingers pausing over the keys. She looked up, eyes filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. "I think I've found something." Quince leaned in, interest piqued. "What kind of something? The kind that saves our skins or the kind that gets us vaporized?" Leora snorted. "Hopefully the former, though knowing our luck, probably both." She tapped a few keys and a cascade of data scrolled across the screen. "I've been digging into their digital framework and there's a vulnerability, a chink in their collective consciousness. We could exploit it." Quince crossed his arms, feeling the cold seep into his bones despite the rising tension. "That sounds promising." "So what's the catch?" "It's not much of a chink," Leora admitted, biting her lip. "More like a hairline fracture. We could wedge it open, cause some confusion, but it won't last long." Scylla leaned back in her chair, eyes contemplative. "So basically we're trying to cause a brain fart in an alien hive mind. Sounds like a party." "A block party," Quince corrected, earning a snort from Scylla. "But is it enough?" Leora shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes. "It's a shot in the dark, but it's the best we've got." Quince let the words hang in the air, the weight of them pressing down like the cold of Titan itself. They were a motley crew, a handful of humans against an alien coalition with more tricks than a magician with a grudge. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was taking shots in the dark and somehow hitting the target. Vargas's sudden appearance was as welcome as a surprise audit. The Xylith liaison entered with his usual grin, eyes glinting like a snake eyeing a particularly juicy mouse. "Ambassador Strathmore," Vargas intoned, his voice smooth as oil on ice. "I trust all is well." Quince forced a smile as brittle as the ice outside. "Never better, Vargas. Just plotting your demise, you know, the usual." Vargas chuckled, the sound as unsettling as a child giggling in a horror movie. "Our discussions have been enlightening. I hope you consider our offer seriously." "Seriously considering," Quince said, his voice flat. "Like considering a lobotomy." Vargas inclined his head. "We only wish to help you reach your full potential." "Funny," Quince replied. "That's exactly what they say before they strap you to the operating table." The Xylith eyed him for a moment, then smiled wider. "We'll be in touch." And with that he turned and left, leaving the room feeling colder than before. Quince rubbed a hand over his face. "Well, that was delightful." "Any other wonderful news?" Leora hesitated, her expression a mix of dread and resolve. "Not exactly wonderful, but There's a faction among us considering the Xylith's offer. Of course there is, Quince muttered, rubbing his temples. Because why wouldn't there be? Scylla leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We can't let them. Joining that digital collective is a one-way ticket to losing ourselves. Quince nodded, the reality of their precarious situation weighing heavily on him. We need to convince them otherwise, keep our team together. But how? Leora asked, her voice tinged with desperation. The Xylith's promises are tempting. No pain, no fear, just eternal bliss. That's not living, Quince replied, steel in his voice. That's just existing, and if I'm going to exist, I'd rather do it on my own terms. Even if those terms include fighting a losing battle, Scylla challenged, though there was a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. Especially then, Quince said with a wry smile. Nothing like a good underdog story, right? The room fell silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. They were on the brink, teetering on the edge of something monumental and terrifying. But they were human, damn it, and if anyone could defy the odds, it was them. All right, Quince said, clapping his hands together. Let's get back to work. We've got a chink to wedge, a team to rally, and a coalition to outsmart. Good thing I'm feeling lucky, Scylla quipped, cracking her knuckles and diving back into her work. Leora grinned, a fierce determination blazing in her eyes. And me, reckless, Quince nodded, feeling a flicker of hope reignite. They weren't alone. They had each other, their wits, and a plan, half-baked though it was. It was time to turn the tables. As the team set to work, the embers of defiance glowed brighter. They might be standing in the shadow of a colossus, but shadows only existed where there was light. And they were the light, flickering and stubborn against the encroaching dark. Hours slipped by in a blur of activity, punctuated by the occasional sarcastic comment or gallows humor, a necessary balm in the face of impending doom. Quince found himself oddly buoyed by the camaraderie, even as the stakes threatened to crush them. Vex's discovery was a whisper of hope in their otherwise grim reality. The flaw in the Xylith's digital framework was small, yes, but it was there, a thread they could pull at, unraveling the fabric of the alien's grand design. Quince found himself pacing the room, stopping occasionally to admire the vibrant chaos that unfolded around him. Leora hunched over her terminal, fingers dancing in an intricate ballet of keystrokes, while Scylla alternated between her data pad and sips of what might generously be called coffee. In any other scenario, they could have been mistaken for a particularly dysfunctional club, but here they were warriors, sharpening their swords in preparation for the fight of their lives. The door to the conference room slid open again, admitting a blast of cold air that made Quince's spine shiver. This time, the visitor was not Vargas, but Halston, one of the newer members of the embassy staff. His expression was a curious mixture of determination and trepidation, the mark of someone who'd come to a decision and was unsure if it was the right one. Ambassador Strathmore, Halston began, hesitating at the threshold. Can I have a moment? Quince nodded, gesturing for the young man to enter. Of course, Halston, what's on your mind? Halston took a deep breath, stepping fully into the room. I've been talking with some of the others, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty flickering in his eyes. About the Xylith offer. Quince felt his stomach drop, but he kept his tone neutral. And Halston glanced between them, searching for some sign of judgment but finding none. It's just, the idea of joining the collective is appealing to some. The promise of unity, peace, no more fear. Scylla snorted, crossing her arms. Sure, until you realize unity means losing everything that makes you, well, you. Halston frowned, but there was a hint of understanding in his eyes. I know. But it's hard to ignore the allure when everything seems so hopeless. Hope's a funny thing, Quince mused, meeting Halston's gaze. It doesn't always show itself in grand gestures or big victories. Sometimes it's just a whisper, a hint of something better, like a chink in an otherwise impenetrable wall. Halston nodded slowly, the weight of his dilemma evident. So what do we do? How do we convince the others? Quince exchanged a look with Scylla and Leora, finding strength in their shared determination. We show them what it means to be human, he said, his voice strong. The good, the bad, and the beautifully messy. We remind them that we're not just fighting to survive, we're fighting to live, to be more than the sum of our fears and doubts. Leora squared her shoulders, her eyes resolute. And we give them a reason to fight alongside us, a plan, a path forward, something to hold onto when everything else slips away. Halston nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his expression. All right, I'll talk to them. I can't promise anything, but I'll try. Quince clapped him on the shoulder. That's all we can ask for. Thank you, Halston. As Halston left to rally the rest of the team, Quince turned back to Leora and Scylla, a newfound resolve coursing through him. Let's keep at it. The Xylith might have us outgunned, outnumbered, and out of our minds, but they don't have what we've got. And what's that? Leora asked, her smile a touch more confident now. Quince grinned, a spark of defiance in his eyes. A healthy dose of madness and a complete disregard for the odds. As the team dove back into their work, Quince couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. A slim one, sure, but a chance nonetheless. Because if they were going to go down, they'd do it with style, a middle finger raised to the cosmos, and a snarky comment on their lips. After all, humanity had always been at its best when it had nothing left to lose. And in that cold, metal box of an embassy, the flame of defiance burned just a little brighter, fighting against the dark with everything it had. The room was as cold as a Titan divorce. Quince Strathmore stood at the head of the table, staring at his ragtag crew of would-be saviors like a beleaguered teacher before a class of hyperactive school kids who'd just discovered sugar. Well, if they were going to cock this up, at least they'd do it with some style. All right, team, he said, clapping his hands together like a desperate motivational speaker. We've got a plan. Vex nodded, her expression the bastard child of eagerness and dread. You mean that harebrained scheme of injecting creativity into the Xylith network? Quince grinned with all the grim determination of a man who'd just bet his life savings on a three-legged horse. Exactly. It's the perfect way to remind them that humans are, if nothing else, unpredictable bastards. Scylla leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. So, we're going to give them a taste of good old human chaos and hope it throws a spanner in their digital works. More like a grenade, Quince replied. Our creativity is our weapon. We hit them where they are not expecting it, right in their logic circuits. Sounds dangerous, Scylla said with a wry smile. I'm in. Leora, fingers still tapping away at her display, glanced up with a gleam in her eye. I've managed to isolate the vulnerable part of their collective consciousness. It's like finding a loose thread on a very ugly sweater. Great, Quince said. Let's unravel it and see if we can make it even uglier. Across the table, Vex cracked her knuckles, her face a mask of grim determination. If we can introduce enough chaos, it might buy us the time we need to solidify our defenses. Xylox, the Xylith leader's digital presence, flickered into view on the oversized Rubik's Cube contraption on the table. His misaligned eyes danced over them like a predatory crow evaluating roadkill. Humans and their plans, he said, voice dripping with condescension. You do realize that creativity is but a frivolity in the grand scheme of the universe. Quince met Xylox's gaze, unflinching. Frivolity, maybe, but it's gotten us this far. Besides, I've always found the grand scheme of the universe to be overrated. Xylox's features twisted into something approximating confusion. Your resistance is intriguing, though ultimately futile. Futility's our middle name, Scylla retorted, her smile as sharp as a razor blade. We're the humans you can't quite compute. Xylox blinked out, leaving the room with an odd sense of relief. Quince turned back to his team, feeling a surge of determination. All right, folks, let's get creative, he said. Leora, can you get us into their network? She nodded, already working her magic on the display. Consider it done. Just give me a few minutes to patch into their systems. Quince paced the room, rubbing his hands together to ward off the cold that still clung to the air like an unwanted guest. Here's the deal. We introduce a series of unpredictable variables into their collective consciousness. Let's give them a brain freeze they won't forget. Scylla glanced up from her data pad. Like a cosmic brain fart. Exactly, Quince said, liking the sound of that. Something they can't predict or control. We hit them with a barrage of creativity, art, music, literature, the stuff that makes us human. Vex snorted. So we're weaponizing bad taste, pretty much, Quince replied. It's the one thing they can't anticipate. As Leora worked, the rest of the team gathered around, tossing out ideas like confetti at a wake. It was a chaotic brainstorming session, filled with dark humor and the kind of sarcasm you'd find in the trenches. We could throw in some avant-garde jazz, Scylla suggested, tapping her data pad with a wicked grin. That stuff could confuse anyone, or some postmodern poetry, Vex added. The kind that doesn't rhyme and makes no sense. Quince nodded, jotting down notes like a mad scientist concocting a particularly volatile potion. Perfect. Let's throw in some abstract art for good measure. The room buzzed with a frenetic energy, the kind that came from knowing you were on the brink of something monumental and possibly catastrophic. But if they were going down, they'd do it with the full force of their collective insanity. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the team fueled by adrenaline and bad coffee. They worked tirelessly, stacking layers of creativity like a tower of mismatched blocks, each one more precarious than the last. Finally, Leora looked up, her expression triumphant. We're in. Quince felt a thrill of excitement mixed with dread. All right, everyone, let's give them a show they won't forget. As Leora initiated the transfer, the room seemed to hold its breath. This was it, the moment they'd been working towards, the culmination of their defiance and ingenuity. They were about to unleash the full spectrum of human creativity onto an unsuspecting alien consciousness. Leora hit the final command, and the room erupted into chaos. It was a symphony of noise and color, a cacophony of ideas and emotions crashing against the Xylith network like a tidal wave. The Xylith embassy's systems flickered, their digital facade contorting as if caught in an electric storm. It was working, at least for now. The network was reeling under the assault of human creativity, struggling to process the deluge of unpredictable data. Quince watched, feeling a mix of awe and satisfaction. It was madness, of course, but it was their madness, and it was beautiful in its own way. We did it, Leora said, her voice barely above a whisper. We actually did it. Scylla whooped, punching the air with a victorious grin. Score one for the underdogs. Quince allowed himself a brief moment of victory before reality came crashing back. All right, everyone, this is just the beginning. We've bought ourselves some time, but we're not out of the woods yet. Vex nodded, her expression serious. We still have to figure out our next move. The Xylith won't take this lying down. Quince knew she was right. They'd poked the hornet's nest, and it was only a matter of time before the Xylith retaliated. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like they had a chance. A slim one, sure, but a chance nonetheless. Let's regroup and figure out our next steps, he said, rallying his team with a determined nod. We've got momentum on our side, and we need to keep pressing the advantage. As the team gathered around the table, discussing their next moves with renewed vigor, Quince felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose that had been missing for far too long. They might be fighting against the odds, but they were doing it together, as a team. And for now, that was enough. All right, let's keep our heads on straight, Quince said, injecting a little levity into the gravity of the situation. And remember, no matter what happens, we're in this together. Scylla leaned back, her grin as sharp as ever. And when we get out of this, drinks are on you, right, boss? Quince chuckled, feeling a spark of hope reignite. You bet. Just as long as it's not that Titan swill. I'm not looking to poison myself. The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the cold metal walls like a defiant declaration of their humanity. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. And as they turned their attention back to the task at hand, Quince felt a surge of determination. They were far from the finish line, but they were closer than they'd ever been. They'd taken the first step into the unknown, and the future was theirs to shape. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning chaos into opportunity and finding hope in the darkest of places. As the team worked late into the frigid night, the flame of defiance burned brighter, casting its light against the encroaching dark. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was more than enough. In the end, they were humans, flawed, unpredictable, and irrepressibly stubborn, and they wouldn't have it any other way. Quint Strathmore felt like a gambler on a winning streak, knowing full well the house always wins in the end, but damn if the rush wasn't worth it. The team was on fire, metaphorically speaking, but in a room this cold, literal fire might actually be a blessing. He could almost hear the Xylith network groaning under the assault of their chaotic masterpiece. "All right, folks," he said, clapping his hands with the enthusiasm of an overcaffeinated cheerleader, "we've thrown a wrench in the works. Let's see how they like their logic circuits all nice and scrambled." Vex, ever the practical pessimist, crossed her arms with a smirk. "Or how about a scrambled omelet of existential dread?" "That's always a hit." Leora, still glued to her display, chuckled. "We've basically turned their network into an art installation. I'd call it descent into madness, but that seems too on the nose, as long as it's not humanity. The greatest hits were good," Scylla chimed in, her eyes darting over her data pad like a cat watching a laser pointer. Quince glanced over at the oversized Rubik's Cube contraption sitting ominously in the corner. It was a comforting sight, knowing Xylox had probably been knocked on his digital ass by now. "How's our not-so-friendly neighborhood AI handling it?" "Like a malfunctioning toaster oven," Leora replied, not taking her eyes off the display. "His systems are jittering worse than a caffeine addict in withdrawal." "Good," Quint said, feeling a sense of satisfaction settle in his chest like a warm drink. It was rare, feeling victorious in a universe that loved kicking you when you're down, but they were riding the high as long as it lasted. The Xylith embassy, silhouetted against Titan's bleak horizon, flickered like an old neon sign about to give up the ghost. It was oddly poetic, Quince thought, a testament to their handiwork, though he'd never admit it out loud. "Think they'll take the hint?" Vex asked, her voice a mix of skepticism and hope. Quince shrugged, knowing full well the Xylith weren't known for their graciousness. "If they've got any sense of self-preservation, yeah. But I wouldn't bet my last credit on them playing nice. Perhaps they'll see the humor in it," Scylla mused, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Aliens love a good joke, right?" "Sure," Quince replied. "If that joke involves annexing another species' free will." The room buzzed with a nervous energy as they waited for the inevitable retaliation. The human embassy, a prefab slab of metal pretending to be an official building, groaned in the icy winds of Titan. It wasn't much, but it was home, at least until the next big screw-up forced them to relocate. As if on cue, the Rubik's Cube flared to life, Xylox's form crackling into existence with all the charm of a tax collector. His digital expression was unreadable, but Quince liked to think it was flustered. "Humans," Xylox sneered, his voice a digital growl. "Your actions are reckless." "Reckless is our middle name," Scylla shot back, her grin sharper than a vibro blade. "Or was it defiant?" "I always mix those two up." Xylox's form flickered as if caught in a storm of static, his composure slipping. "You cannot comprehend the consequences of your actions." "Oh, we comprehend just fine," Vex said, arms still crossed, her stance relaxed but ready. "We just don't care. Besides, your network could use a little shaking up." "It's a fixer-upper," Leora added, not looking up from her work. "We're just doing some creative renovations." Quince didn't bother hiding his smirk. "Consider it a gift from humanity. A little chaos to spice up your clinical existence." Xylox's features wavered, a glitchy storm of frustration and confusion. "Your creativity is an anomaly, a statistical outlier. And yet here we are," Quince countered, feeling the weight of their defiance like a badge of honor. "Anomalies with a knack for survival." Xylox's form steadied, the flicker of his image diminishing. "This is not the end. We will adapt, sure, just like a bad haircut, Scylla quipped. Eventually it grows out. Xylox blinked out, the Rubik's Cube falling silent, an ominous reminder that their victory was temporary at best. Quince turned to his team, feeling the corners of his mouth twitch upwards. All right, folks, we've bought ourselves some time, but let's not get too comfortable. They'll come back swinging once they patch up their systems. Vex nodded, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. We'll be ready, or at least pretending to be, Leora said with a wink, her fingers already dancing over her display, working on the next phase of their plan. The cold reality of Titan seeped into the room once more, a constant reminder that their situation was far from resolved. But for now, they'd managed to turn the tide, if only by a fraction. Quince gathered his team around, a motley crew bound by necessity and a shared stubbornness to survive. In their faces he saw determination, a fierce spark that refused to be extinguished. "Here's the plan," Quince said, leaning in conspiratorially. "We keep pushing, keep adapting. Creativity is our weapon, and we've got plenty more where that came from." Vex nodded, her gaze steady. "We'll outmaneuver them. They're not used to thinking outside the box, or inside it," Scylla added, gesturing at the now dormant Rubik's Cube. "Xylith aren't exactly known for their lateral thinking, which gives us the advantage," Quince concluded, feeling the weight of their mission settle comfortably on his shoulders. "We've got the momentum, so let's keep them guessing." The team broke, each member focused on their individual tasks, a synchronized chaos that thrived under pressure. They knew the stakes, understood the precarious balance they'd struck, but there was no denying the thrill of the challenge. Quince watched them, feeling a swell of pride that he quickly squashed. No sense in getting sentimental when the universe had a habit of turning optimism into a punchline. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, his mind whirring with a mix of strategies and backup plans. They were fighting an uphill battle, but for the first time it felt like they had a shot at winning. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was insanity, but in the cold, unforgiving light of Titan, it was all they had. As the hours ticked by, the team worked tirelessly, a whirlwind of activity that defied their exhaustion. Each keystroke, each line of code, adding to the labyrinth they were weaving around the Xylith systems. Finally, Leora looked up, her face a mask of concentration. "I've got another vulnerability. Looks like they're struggling to patch the holes we've punched through their defenses." "Good," Quince said, nodding. "Let's see if we can turn that struggle into a full-blown crisis." Vex leaned over, her voice low and determined. "We're playing a dangerous game, you know. Aren't we always?" Quince replied, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "But if there's one thing humans are good at, it's making the impossible look like an invitation." Scylla rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "That optimism of yours is gonna get us killed one day." "Maybe," Quince conceded, "but not today." The team continued their work, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they were making a difference, however small. In a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them down, they were fighting back with everything they had. And for now, that was enough. Hours turned into days, the fight against the Xylith a relentless, exhausting marathon. Quince and his team pushed forward, drawing on reserves of creativity and determination that seemed bottomless. Yet through it all, the camaraderie remained, a lifeline in the darkness, a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. Then one day, as the digital storm raged on, Xylox's form shimmered back into existence, though this time his demeanor was different. Less arrogant, more resigned. "Humans," he began, his voice lacking its usual condescension, "we acknowledge your unique capabilities." "Ah," the sweet smell of a begrudging compliment, Quince drawled, smirking. "Just what I needed to start the day." Xylox's image flickered, his features betraying a flicker of something akin to exasperation. "Your disruptive potential is significant. We propose a cessation of hostilities, peace talks." "Huh," Scylla said, arching an eyebrow. "Didn't think you had it in you." "We do not wish to escalate further," Xylox replied, his tone betraying a hint of reluctance. Your creativity is an asset we would prefer to harness rather than confront. Quince exchanged glances with his team, their expressions a mix of surprise and cautious optimism. It wasn't a victory, not quite, but it was a start, a step towards something more sustainable than constant warfare. "All right," Quince said, his voice steady. "Let's see where this leads. But know this, we're not signing up for any digital servitude. We play by our rules." Xylox nodded, the static around his form settling into a semblance of calm. "Understood. We will negotiate further terms." As Xylox blinked out, the team let out a collective sigh of relief. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a chance, a glimmer of hope in a galaxy that rarely offered such luxuries. "Well," Vex said, chuckling softly, "looks like we've impressed the neighbors, or pissed them off enough to back down," Leora added, grinning. "Either way, I'll take it." Quince felt the tension ease from his shoulders, the weight of their struggle temporarily lifted. They'd fought, they'd adapted, and against the odds, they'd carved out a space for themselves in a universe that wanted nothing more than to swallow them whole. "Drinks are definitely on you, boss," Scylla declared, her voice light with triumph. Quince laughed, a sound that echoed off the metal walls, a rare moment of joy in their grim existence. "Fine, but only the good stuff. We've earned it." As the team regrouped, planning their next steps with a renewed sense of purpose, Quince felt a familiar determination settle in his chest. They weren't done, not by a long shot, but they'd won this round. And in the grand cosmic scheme, that was no small feat. In the end, it was a testament to their humanity, their stubbornness, their creativity, their refusal to go quietly into the night. They'd shown the galaxy what humans were made of, and for now, that was enough. "Here's to us," Quince said, raising an imaginary glass. "To chaos, creativity, and whatever the hell comes next." The team toasted, their laughter ringing out like a defiant anthem against the encroaching dark. For better or worse, they were in this together, and they wouldn't have it any other way. "To chaos, creativity, and whatever the hell comes next," Quince repeated, savoring the moment like it was the last drop of some particularly toxic space whiskey. The team clinked their imaginary glasses, a rare moment of levity in an existence that more often resembled a bad joke told by an uncaring universe. "Cheers to us," Scylla said, raising her non-existent glass with exaggerated flair. "The galaxy's favorite band of merry misfits. Speak for yourself," Vex snorted, standing up and stretching her arms, the joints popping like cheap firecrackers. "I'd rather be the galaxy's most underpaid contractors." "Underpaid? You're getting paid," Leora quipped, not looking up from her display, still tweaking the latest piece of code like it was a stubborn puzzle that refused to fit. "I thought this was all for the glory of human stubbornness." "Glory won't buy you a ticket off this ice cube," Quince pointed out, his eyes scanning the room, taking stock of his crew. They were tired, worn at the edges, but still standing. That was something. But it might get us a warmer corner of hell. The prefab embassy on Titan, a metal shoebox with all the charm of a casket, was, for now, their sanctuary. Outside, the desolate landscape stretched endlessly, the kind of view that made you question your life choices. Inside, the heating system wheezed like a smoker on a treadmill, barely keeping the biting cold at bay. Xylox's nebulous threat still hung in the air like a bad smell, the Rubik's Cube contraption dormant for now, but likely biding its time. Quince knew better than to believe their victory was absolute. The Xylith were nothing if not persistent, like an interstellar rash that just wouldn't clear up. "Let's not kid ourselves," Quince said, his voice cutting through the good-natured banter like a vibro blade. "We've won a skirmish, not the war. Xylox and his digital goons aren't going to let a little creative chaos slow them down for long. Yeah, but we've given them something to chew on," Scylla countered, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "And if they choke on it, all the better." Leora tapped a few final keys, satisfied as her latest digital booby trap slid into place. "We've bought ourselves some time at least. A chance to regroup, refuel, and maybe figure out how to stay one step ahead, or at least half a step," Vex added, her smirk a permanent fixture on her face. I'm not a fan of always running in place, no matter how good the cardio. Quince nodded, acknowledging the truth of their words. They'd shaken up the Xylith, maybe even earned a grudging respect, but it wouldn't last. The multiverse had taken notice, and that meant more eyes, some curious, others less so, would be watching their every move. As if on cue, the comm unit crackled to life, a familiar, static-laden voice cutting through the ambient noise. Quint Strathmore, this is Commander Steele of the Terran Unity Fleet. The room went silent, all eyes turning to the comm unit. The Terran Unity Fleet was as close to an official human presence as one could get in this part of the galaxy, and their attention was rarely a good sign. Quince pressed the comm button, trying to keep his tone casual. Commander Steele, to what do we owe the pleasure? I hope it's not another lecture on interspecies etiquette. I'd hate to think we've broken some unspoken rule about diplomacy and digital vandalism. A sigh crackled over the line, the kind of sigh that spoke of long-suffering patience. Strathmore, you and your team have made quite the impression. The Xylith Coalition's request for peace talks has caught us all off guard. Happy to oblige, Quince replied, feigning modesty. We aim to please, or at least baffle. Indeed, Steele said dryly. But while your unconventional methods have yielded results, they've also put you on the radar of several less-than-friendly entities. We've intercepted communications expressing interest in your unique talents. Great, Vex muttered, rolling her eyes. We're famous, or infamous, Quince thought, but he kept the observation to himself. We'll keep that in mind, Commander. Any advice besides keeping our heads down? Stay alive, Steele replied, the static making it sound like an order rather than a suggestion. We'll be monitoring the situation. Unity Fleet out. The comm cut off, leaving the team in a contemplative silence. Quince could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the wheels of strategy and survival clicking into place. Well, Scylla said, breaking the silence with her trademark irreverence. Looks like we've gone and made ourselves popular. Fame and fortune, Leora said with a wry smile. Shame we're only getting the fame, and the kind of attention that usually comes with a target on your back, Vex added, her tone more resigned than worried. Not the first time, Quince said, shrugging off the weight of their newfound notoriety, and probably not the last. We'll just have to keep moving. So what's next, fearless leader? Scylla asked, her voice equal parts sarcasm and genuine curiosity. Quince leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under the strain. We keep doing what we do best, staying unpredictable, staying creative. If the Xylith think they can negotiate us into a corner, they are in for a surprise. And the other entities? Leora asked, eyes flicking back to her display. If they come knocking, what's the plan then? The same as always, Quince replied, his expression hardening. We deal with them on our terms, not theirs. We've faced worse odds before. Vex nodded, a touch of steel in her voice. And we'll face them again. No one ever said survival would be easy, and if they had, they'd be lying through their teeth, Scylla said, a grin splitting her face. I say bring it on. The galaxy could use a little shaking up. Quince chuckled, the sound a welcome reassurance against the uncertainty that lay ahead. They'd face demons, both digital and personal, and come out the other side, maybe not unscathed, but still standing. All right then, he said, a sense of finality in his words. We've got our marching orders such as they are. Let's get to work. The team broke, their movements purposeful and confident, a well-oiled machine of chaos and ingenuity. Each member dove into their tasks, their roles as vital as the air they breathed. Quince watched them, feeling the cold of Titan seep into his bones but refusing to let it settle. They'd carved out a space for themselves in this unforgiving universe, a place where they could thrive, despite the odds. Outside, Titan's bleak horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Their victory against Xylox and the Xylith was a flickering light in an otherwise Stygian expanse, but in the grand scheme of things it was enough. For now. As the Iors slipped by, the team worked tirelessly, their efforts a testament to their resilience and creativity. They were, by all accounts, a motley crew, a band of misfits thrown together by chance and necessity, but somehow it worked. Their synergy, their camaraderie, whatever you wanted to call it, was an unbreakable bond, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the harsh realities of survival in space. Quince knew that they were far from finished. Their story was still being written, each line a gamble in an endless game of cosmic roulette. But for now, they had their victory, however small, and that was enough to carry them forward into the unknown. "Here's to us," Quince murmured again, this time to himself, a silent vow against the encroaching darkness. To chaos, creativity, and whatever the hell comes next. The future stretched out before them, vast and unpredictable, but for the first time in a long time, Quince felt something akin to hope. And that, in a universe hell-bent on making a mockery of their efforts, was the greatest victory of all. The team carried on, their laughter and banter echoing through the metal corridors of the embassy, a defiant melody against the silence of space. They'd faced the impossible, fought against the odds, and emerged with their heads held high. As the Iors turned into days, Quince and his crew stood ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They were survivors, fighters, creators of chaos in a universe that thrived on order and control. And in the end, that was what set them apart, what made them uniquely human in a galaxy where humanity was an anomaly, a statistical outlier. Their journey was far from over, but for now they had what they needed: each other, their wits, and the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. It was a start, and in the grand scheme of things, that was more than enough. "Let's get to work," Quince said one last time, his voice carrying the weight of determination and resolve. The team nodded, their eyes alight with the fire of purpose and the promise of future adventures. As they set to their tasks, the universe watched, waiting with bated breath for the next chapter in their story, a tale of chaos, creativity, and the unyielding spirit that defined them. And so, with the galaxy as their stage and fate as their script, they forged ahead, ready to conquer whatever came next. For they were human, irreverent, unpredictable, and endlessly resourceful. And in the end, that made all the difference.